Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special presentation of the 2022 State of the CIO survey results presented by IDG, CIO, and the CIO Executive Council. My name is Tim Scannell, and I'm Vice President of Strategic Content at the Council. This is the 21st edition of this definitive benchmark research that provides a quantitative glimpse at what IT and business leaders are planning in terms of budgeting, technology, and business initiatives, dealing with IT talent's challenges, hybrid work environments, and the balance and sometimes tension between operational and strategic responsibilities. As we review the results of the survey, we will also discuss the impact the pandemic has had on the CIO role and the IT department in general as well. In all, more than 1,200 IT and line of business executives participated in this year's survey, representing a range of industries from manufacturing and healthcare to retail and government agencies. Leading the discussion from IDG's studio in Needham, Massachusetts, is our moderator, John Gallant, the Enterprise Consulting Director at IDG. Joining us to provide a frontline perspective on the survey results are two CIO Executive Council members, Bess Healy, Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer at Synchrony Financial, a leading financial services company, and Matt Lesmanis, Chief Technology and Innovation Officer at Sage Therapeutics, a biopharmaceutical dedicated to developing medicines and therapies to counter debilitating brain disorders. Before we begin, I'd also like to invite viewers to take an active part in this discussion by asking questions or offering comments on the survey results, all via the chat function. We'll do our best to integrate these into the conversation. We have a lot of ground to cover today, so I'll now turn it over to John to walk us through the survey results and lead the discussion. John?
Thanks, Tim, and hi, everyone. I'm really glad to be moderating this discussion on IDG's State of the CIO research for the second time, and very happy to be with Bess, Matt, and Tim to talk about the results. You know, as Tim said, this survey covers a lot of ground, and in this conversation, we'll use that research to tee up our own conversation about a number of different topics, as Tim mentioned, from budgets in 2022, CIO reporting structure, key technology and business goals, hybrid work, hiring, retaining, managing in this new world that we're all working in, and the impact on the pandemic on CIOs, as well as the whole IT department, among other things. Now, in this presentation, we're going to be working on an abridged version of the research report, but we'll make the full State of the CIO research report available to all of you. And as Tim mentioned, we really would love to hear your questions. We'd like to make this as inclusive as possible. So let me just walk through some introductory slides. As Tim mentioned, there are over 1,000 respondents to this survey, because the survey not only includes senior IT executives, it also includes about 250 line of business executives as well. We love that because we love to have that perspective to look and see where there's agreement and disagreement on the role of the CIO, the role of the IT department, and goals for the organization, for example. So you can see that it's primarily North America, about 70%, but EMEA and APAC make up the rest of that in a variety of industries and company sizes. So we're going to look at a lot of different areas, but let's look at the current technology landscape from a budget perspective. So what we see here is some really good optimism, and I'll show you this in context in a moment. About 60% of the respondents to this survey tell us that their IT budgets will increase this year in 2022. 32% say they're remaining the same, and about 10% say a decrease. Now, if you look, as Tim mentioned, this survey has been going on for decades, which gives us the ability to really track back and put that in perspective with other years. And I would compare what happened in, for example, December 2019 till today with what happened in the Great Recession, which is in that gray bar, or the beginning of that is in the gray bar on the left-hand side. So we can see here the blue line is what I would call budget optimism, the people who think their budgets are going to increase. It was very healthy in December 2019, but you can see that number plummeted as we got into the throes of the pandemic. In April, when things were starting to shut down around the country in 2020, you could see that 25% of the respondents felt the budgets would go up, way down from the previous number. And the number who were looking at cuts was really jumped up in red. But over the course of multiple surveys, not only this, but some pandemic research that we did at IDG, you can see that we're back to where we were just a couple of years ago with that budget optimism. And we're going to talk about that and what that means. Compare that with the Great Recession, where budget optimism really dived, and it took many, many more quarters, many more months for that to come back up. Top reasons? Well, interestingly, across this survey, you're going to see that security issues have risen to the top of a lot of different categories. But the need for security improvements, need to upgrade outdated IT infrastructure, investment in new skills and talent. There's so much change going on. We need the skills and talent to be able to address that. Product innovation as well. And another theme, changes to support remote and hybrid workers. Now, it's a smaller group, only 10% who said the budgets would go down, but these are the reasons why their budgets are going down. Part of that was in 2021, as you can see from the second line, that they made a big investment that they don't need to repeat. So it may not necessarily be a budget decline, just comparatively speaking. But again, economic instability and uncertainty, the top reason, or struggles in a particular company level. So I want to ask Matt and Bess and Tim to join in with me here. Does this match your experiences and expectations around the budget? Bess, why don't we start with you? Is this what your budget plans are looking like? Is there anything in here that surprises you?
Actually, it does surprise me, just from Synchrony's experience. An overall swing for us, we have continued to invest in the business and product and customer experience to drive the right growth and partnerships. So I can say certainly we don't reflect the dip that you see going through the pandemic in overall tech budget or investment in the future of the business.
Yeah, Matt, how about for you?
I mean, similarly, we're emerging, high-tech growth biopharmaceutical firm. Really, our strategy and focus from a digital and tech perspective is ensuring that we have the right capabilities to help the company grow into the future. So I think, our investment horizon is a little bit longer term than maybe what's reflected in the survey data here as well.
Yeah. And Tim, when you look across all the conversations you're having with CIOs as part of the CIO Executive Council, anything surprise you in those numbers?
No, they really don't, John. I think a lot of people are investing or plan to invest a lot in infrastructure, in building resiliency, certainly cybersecurity. I think the companies that are probably investing more this time around are the ones that maybe were caught, with their shoelaces untied before, and they discovered they didn't have the mobile platforms to support a mostly remote environment. They didn't have the infrastructure that was stable enough, or maybe they weren't cloud enabled enough, and they're going to be investing in that going forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. In one of our first pandemic research studies that we did in 2020, we heard from a number of folks that their business resiliency plans did not hold up as expected during the pandemic. So I think you might be on a course, the right course there in your comments, Tim. And Bess, I know you've talked about resiliency being a huge issue in your organization.
Yes, I don't know if issue is the right word I would use, but it is a very big focus for the future. As we think about products, as we think about investment in the hybrid working environment. So when you hit the highlights on why budgets will increase, those, I would say, several of those definitely resonate with us in terms of our focus. So definitely everything focused around resiliency, driving the focus around product and expansion there, and customer experience is the other big area.
Great. So I want to look at a couple of other slides here that talk about the impact of the pandemic on the CIO role. One of them was 74% of the respondents say that the CIO role was elevated due to the pandemic, and they expect that visibility within the organization to continue. We'll see a little bit more of that when we look at the reporting structure, with more CIOs reporting directly to the CEO. And we also asked the line of business folks in the survey to kind of assign a role for the CIO in their organization. What's the nature of that CIO role? Well, we saw this big jump in this survey from 28% to 58% of the line of business folks saying the CIO is now strategic advisor to them, as opposed to consultant, risk assessor, voice of caution, cautious voice of reason, or autonomous player who's kind of working on their own. So I think this is a huge jump, 30 percentage point increase in the number of line of business executives who say that the CIO is now strategic advisor to them. I think this is great news. Love your reaction to it. Matt, why don't we start with you? What does this say to you?
Sure, yeah, and it's interesting when you do the math. A lot of it, a lot of the growth in that strategic advisory capacity comes from what you would have considered the more traditionalist sort of perspectives on the CIO, the sort of risk assessor, the cautious voice, et cetera. And I think, to me, what it reflects is the more forward-leaning aspect of the role, right? I think, even if you take my role as an example, we don't really have a traditionalist CIO role within Sage. My role encompasses what you would consider as chief data officer, analytics officer, digital officer, et cetera, as well as the cybersecurity piece and the underlying operational component. And I think, our view is that, not any of these things in and of themselves make a strategic difference, but when you bring them all together and you weave those capabilities into the strategy of the company, that's where you're really experiencing the value of these technical capabilities of the firm, right? So I think that's really how we think about it. It's more, are we building the right strategic capabilities for the future that encompass people, process, as well as the technical piece, not just the technical piece?
I think that's an important distinction, what Matt just said. The CIO has always been trying to win a seat at the table, so to speak. And now it's all of a sudden, it's like you're lunging over the table and they're listening to you more carefully. But Matt is obviously wearing a lot of hats. And what I'm finding in talking to the CIOs in the council is that, some of them are even changing their title. We have a CIO from a rather large firm who changed his title recently to Chief Technology and Transformation Officer. So a lot of the reflection of roles is going to be on the evolution of the IT organization. What is it going to look like as we go through this period of resiliency and maybe some recovery?
Yeah. Bess, any thoughts on this?
Yes, I think we have to be careful and not be defined by our titles. I think we have to be what the business needs us to be. Through the pandemic, the rise in strategic advisor was certainly critical, but also putting us in a position to leverage the investments that we had made up until that point to keep the business enabled and up and running, even while all of us were moving our entire workforce home to keep them safe, since safety was first. And actually keeping our employees safe was what it meant to take care of our customers and our partners. So I just, I think we need to be what we need to be for the business. And sometimes that changes on any given day. And you have to pull all of those skill sets and capabilities and bring them to bear with your teams to support where the business is headed, and sometimes help set that direction.
Yeah, and this is something that I hear in a lot of conversations with CIOs and other senior tech leaders is, in many ways, and it's a strange thing to say, the pandemic was good for us. It put us forefront. We had to help pivot to hybrid work or telemedicine or remote learning or, new ways of doing retail to help our company. So I guess I'd ask you all, how do you capitalize on this? So it was a moment where the visibility and the power of technology was really illustrated. How do you capitalize? How do you keep that goodwill going, or maybe even, get more budget increase out of this moment? But how do you capitalize?
Yeah, I think the way that I look at it is, industry trends, they tend to change gradually and then suddenly based on some event, right? And I think, as you say, John, the pandemic itself, delivered a lot of catastrophic events to the world and was very tragic. However, it also catalyzed this acceleration of technology as well. And I think as firms experience the use of digital business models, remote customer engagement, remote working, some of those practices will become normative due to just the amount of time now that we've been experiencing them, right? And I think, to me, it's not so much capitalizing on an opportunity, but it's how do we maintain the momentum of building these kinds of things into the DNA of firms to help firms be successful for themselves, but also for their customers.
Hey, Matt, do you kind of feel like we got the opportunity to build credibility in some cases in some technology organizations through the pandemic? And if so, you kind of think about how you sustain that kind of credibility going forward?
I think, to me, a lot of the core platforms, the basic capabilities, they were in place already, right? And I think the events of the pandemic made them, it almost converted them from, I won't say optional, but sort of secondary to kind of primary, right? And now that we're on the front foot, I think it's how do we sustain and maintain the momentum of that? And now really exploit those capabilities
Yeah.
to drive and shape the strategy of the future. I think to me that if there is an opportunity there, that's how I sort of think about it, if that makes
So
sense.
let me add something to the mix. So do you think the whole concept of DR or disaster recovery has changed? We're at a moment now, we have the pandemic, we're worried about cybersecurity. Things are going to happen. So it's not necessarily recovery, it's being how fast you're able to pivot. And I would think that IT organization is more important today than ever, because that's the pinnacle of pivoting.
Yeah.
That I believe that's the heart of the resiliency conversation. That, disaster recovery, business continuity, that's just one aspect. Security by design, resiliency by design across our processes, across our people and our skill sets, as well as, yes, of course, our technology. So that's why resiliency is such a big focus at Synchrony. We know that bad things happen, and we have to be able to sustain our capabilities and our operations, even though bad things are going to happen.
Great.
Yeah. And I think it stresses the concept of agility and adaptability, right? Like, how can we quickly change new information? How can we make a new decision, new business opportunities? How can we capitalize on them, right? Versus the traditionalist kind of view of it. So
Yeah, and Matt, to steal a word from you, that the word normative, I have the sense that a lot of things that people had been talking about and sort of had the luxury to talk about, maybe the acceleration of the move to the cloud or AI and analytics, machine learning, that the pandemic really forced movement on those things. But as a result, those balls are rolling much faster now, and to your term, will become normative for these organizations going forward, which really does more to exhibit the power of technology to these organizations as well.
right, in effect, it sets a new baseline.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Now it's on us to continue to improve from here, right?
Right.
I think that's an aspect of the challenge in some ways, but it definitely sets a new baseline.
Great. Well, let's look at some of the other slides. One of the areas that I want to talk about is some of the other roles that IT folks, other roles that exist within the organization. So we asked, does your organization have a chief data officer? Does it have a chief digital officer, chief innovation officer? About 60% of the organizations say, no, we don't have any of the above. But 23%, actually, if you look at large enterprises, about a third have a chief data officer. A third have a chief digital officer. And a smaller percentage, about 20%, have a chief innovation officer. I'd love to know what you all think of these titles and these roles, and particularly how they sync up with the CIO role. Do they report to CIOs? Are they operating independently? Are they a problem, an opportunity? Love to hear your perspective. Bess, why don't we start with you on this one?
Sure. I think the hierarchy is actually less important than the commitment to collaboration. So, at Synchrony, we've had various changes in organizational hierarchy over time. Certainly, as we think about data and innovation and our overall digital journey, these things are all critically important. But where they sit is less important than really how they work together if they're not combined. And so, I think that as I think about the audience today, and I put myself in your shoes, I'd be more focused on making sure you've got the right connections, alignment, and partnership in place, regardless of where they sit hierarchically in the organization.
Yeah, and I'll put a little bit of a different spin on it, Matt, to ask you.
Sure.
Do the existence of these titles, chief data officer is probably a different animal, but chief digital officer, chief innovation officer, chief transformation officer, do they speak to a failure of the CIO to achieve some things that the company has wanted to achieve?
Well, it's interesting. So if you were to ask me at Sage, do we have these roles? I would say, yeah, you're speaking with the person that occupies all these roles. Kind of. Of course, we're a smaller, younger, emergent company, but I think our perspective is we're really trying to create the outcomes and the capabilities that the business needs, right, to move forward and be effective with our strategy and be effective with our medicines that we're trying to deliver out to our customers. That's what we're trying to do, and I think we're trying to harness all those kinds of digital data analytics capabilities in order to get there. From our perspective, it makes sense to have those in one place because we feel like we can have the critical mass to be effective and strategic by having them all, in our view with my organization. But I think, every company is different and they need to think through these problems, from their own perspective and shape their organizations in ways that make sense. So, from our point of view, we don't really have an organization we even call IT anymore. My organization is called Digital and Enterprise Capabilities, and it's called that because we're trying to reflect, it's not just about the technological element, it's about getting all of this space right to help us get to where we need to go. So
yeah. Tim, what's your perspective in talking with your CEC members?
I think it's the same as Matt's. It depends on the size of the company. Matt's wearing a lot of hats, or the structure of the organization. If you look at a company like MITRE Corporation, they have multiple CIOs that are very department oriented. None of them really, aspire to be anything but that CIO because they have real defined engineering focus. I'd like to take a step back, though. We have a question from the audience, and focus on maintaining that new credibility that IT seems to be getting or having. The question is, what kinds of projects can we do that might contribute to, pushing this forward or expanding this credibility to IT executives and the company in general?
That's a great question. Who wants to tackle that? Bess, can you want to take a stab at that?
I'll lead off. Sure. I would say the first thing I would recommend is that you focus on what matters to the business, and you measure success in business outcomes, not just in core technology outcomes. And then the second thing I would just say is making sure you're helping make future forward decisions from an overall technology standpoint, so that when bad things do happen, the next challenge that is around the corner that you can't see fully around comes, that you're prepared. And I think if you do those two things, you'll help sustain that credibility.
Great. Matt, you want to tackle that as well?
Yeah, I think for me, it's not so much about what projects can we choose in order to maintain that. I think somewhat similar to Bess, it's where are we trying to go as a company? What's the strategy? What business problems are we trying to solve? And how can we harness these kinds of capabilities to solve those business problems, and making sure that the focus is on things that matter most, right? And I think if you kind of keep that lens to it, that's where I see teams become successful from a strategic level with companies. I think if it's all about the tactics, it's all about the projects, and it's all about the transactions, obviously all those things are critical, but there are things to sort of build on to become strategically relevant. And that's all about, where are we trying to go and what problems are we trying to solve?
Great.
And John, we actually have a follow-on question from the same person. And he's wondering, he said, and will this focus on keeping the lights on, so to speak, and strategic thinking continue? Will one be pushed over the other? Obviously, we're companies are busy building up resiliency and a little bit of recovery, making things stronger. Is this going to impact that strategic push that most CIOs and IT leaders want to be doing?
Yeah, and Tim, we're going to talk about that. We actually have some slides that talk about this tension between the operational role, so the day-to-day, keep the lights on, keep the systems humming, with the transformational and strategic role of the CIO. So we're definitely going to get into that in depth. I think that's a great question. By the way, when I used to do a lot of Network World events in person, I would always promise the first person to ask a question a $10,000 prize. I never have yet delivered on that, and we'll promise this person that as well, but we really appreciate that first question.
Well,
really
actually, I was asking myself the question, John, so thank you very much.
Very nice. Before we leave the conversation around these other titles, innovation, transformation officer, things like that, Matt, you said something interesting the other day when we were having a prep call. You were talking about when CIOs are getting hired into new roles now, they're not going off with CIO titles. What did you mean by that? They're taking different kinds of titles.
Yeah, I think it's just an observation. So my friends and peers that have taken on new roles recently, I actually can't recall one where the title they happened to wind up with was Chief Information Officer. Like it's typically technology and innovation officer like mine, digital innovation, digital and technology, digital and analytics, something like that. Like I haven't, in my peer group anyway, I haven't seen anybody go to a new role lately that was just a pure play CIO type role. And I just thought it was an interesting observation.
Interesting data point. All right, thank you. So let's move on. I want to also talk about the status of the CIO within the organization. So we can see from this slide that about 50% of CIOs today report directly into the CEO. We've always asked about this in the survey, and you can see the trends where it kind of has gone up and down, but the trend has been upward over the past, I would say the past 6 or 7 years. It got a little bit of probably a 6 or 7 percentage point spike during the pandemic year, 2020 and 2021, the pandemic years. So I think that's an interesting data point that I want to ask our colleagues about, but also CIO tenure. So CIO tenure has kind of ranged from a low of 5 years, 6 months to the current 7 years, 5 months, according to the respondents. So, I would ask Matt and Bess and Tim, does it surprise you? Is it necessarily a good thing? I mean, I always sort of assume that the CIO reporting directly into the CEO is sort of the best thing. But is that true? Is that a good thing to be aspiring to, or is this good news? Matt, why don't we?
I'll lead off. I think it depends on the organization and the company culture. So I don't think there's the best one size fits all. It can be really good. It can be, and it can, sort of be neutral. Certainly at Synchrony, we have thought of the role of technology as core to our competitive advantage for the future. And so we've had longstanding alignment of core technology skill sets to the CIO level ever since we became our own company. And, I think that's been good, but I think it's more important that the culture and the appreciation for the importance of technology in the company's future from a product and experience, a partnering standpoint is more valued in the culture. I think that's more important probably than the reporting structure.
Yeah. Matt, what were you going to say on that?
I mean, I think if it's a proxy that suggests that the tech leadership are involved in the totality of leadership of the company and are helping to drive strategic decision making, I think that is a good thing. But I don't know that it necessarily has to be, to Bess's point, solved with a hierarchical mechanism. I think the most important thing is that the tech leadership of the firm are involved. They're seen to be driving strategic decisions, and they're involved in the leadership strategic decision-making process. That's the key component of it. And if this as an industry and as a role is a proxy that suggests that, I think it's a good signal.
Tim, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting dynamics. I think if you look back at 2020 and most of 21, it's reporting to the CEO, especially with a public company. I mean, the businesses were being impacted. And these CEOs had to know what's happening, and technology was driving, resiliency and recovery, so to speak. But now we've shifted to and I think it's going to be more of a relationship with the CFO, because you want projects funded. So you want that chief financial officer in your corner. In fact, I talked to one of our CIOs yesterday or the day before, and he was lamenting that his CFO was recruited away by Microsoft, which gets back to the IT talent problem. We'll talk about that later. But what's in some cases, and I want to get Bess's and Matt's opinion on this, there's a lot of IT project prioritizing and decisions being made by committee. And the committees are made by people on the business side, people on the IT side, and they look at resources and availability, and that's how they make the decisions. There's not a lot of huge risk taking, so they want things to happen a really short space and on time. Bess, what do you feel about that?
Look, we as a company have adopted Agile overall, and that means we have cross-functional decision making, but really strong top-down engagement around business priorities. And so that helps with, the flow through around prioritization and the funding aspect that you alluded to a moment ago, Tim. So, I do think that those things coming together can really pave the way for the right focus, and we're all trying to put limited resources to drive the right outcomes.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. And I have to ask Bess and Matt, does a average tenure of 7 years, 5 months sound good to you? Does that sound optimistic or pessimistic? Matt, what's your take on that?
It's hard to know whether it's relevant or not, to be honest. I think the folks that I see that are successful in their roles, they're in that role because they have a passion about the space, they enjoy what they're doing, and they want to make a big impact. If that's 5 years, if that's 7 years, if that's some other number, I'm not sure of the relevancy of that, necessarily. So.
Makes sense. Bess, any thoughts on that?
I think through the pandemic, stability was pretty important, because we were all trying to deliver on critical, items to just really keep the business running and the lights on and the doors open. I'm with Matt on this. It really depends on the individual and where their passion lies and where their best potential is applied, either in technology or elsewhere within the business. So.
Makes sense. So I want to present a couple slides here that really get to the question that Tim had brought up before. I'm sorry, there was one other slide that I did want to mention here. 86% of CIOs say that their role is becoming more digital and innovation focused. 84% are more involved in leading digital transformation than their business counterparts. And 76% say it's challenging to find the right balance between innovation, business innovation, and operational excellence. We're really going to focus on that. I do want to make a point about this middle number of 84% saying they're more involved in leading digital transformation. When we vet that against the answers from line of business only, turns out they're in agreement that they do view the CIO as the person who is and should be leading those digital transformation efforts. But to this point, and to the questioner's point about finding the right balance between innovation and operational excellence, let's look at two slides. The first slide asks, which of the following activities characterize your focus today? Essentially, where are you spending your time today? I mentioned before that security continues to rise up across all of the answers in this survey. We could see that the number one answer this year is security management is at the top of my list of things that I'm focusing on. That's up 7 percentage points from last year, which is a pretty significant leap. Improving IT operations and system performance is number 2. Modernizing infrastructure and applications is 3. Aligning IT initiatives with business goals is number 4. So, and you can read, I'll let you read the rest of the list, but you can see 3 of the top 4 things that they're currently focusing on are things that I would consider to be very operational: improving performance, modernizing infrastructure and apps, security management. Now, if you go out and ask, what do you want to be focusing on 3 years from now? The picture changes a lot. So you can see that the top 4, 3 of them are things that we would consider to be more, say, business focused or strategic focus, of a strategic focus. A little scary that number 2, 3 years out, remains security management. And this was actually number 10 on this list last year. So there's a lot of concern about security. But again, this kind of focuses on this tension between what I'm doing today, or at least it appears to, what I'm doing today and what I want to be working on in the future. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about this tension between operational and strategic. Do you see it as tension within your organization? And how are you as tech leaders managing that balance? Bess, why don't we start with you on that?
Sure. I think, honestly, I think it comes down to discipline to some extent. I think, look, cyber is going to continue to be, an area of focus, I would say, for the foreseeable future, and managing the risk associated there. But there's risk in other areas, and that's part of what drives sometimes that focus on operations in the day in and day out. But we have to have the discipline to make sure we're rising above that fray and thinking about the future. So if you're not focused on innovation, product strategy, driving the digital journey, customer experience, then you're going to find yourself left behind if you're not careful. And so I think, helping the organization and and overall business leadership keep that focus is a big part of our role. And for us as leaders, something we have to focus on and help the teams have discipline on every day.
Yeah, Matt, how are you dealing with this?
Yeah, I think, look, on the operational side, I think it's incumbent as we expand the concept of the CIO role that we don't drop the ball operationally, right? Like the excellence we brought to operations is what's given us the breathing room to get more involved in the strategic end of the business, right? So I think that's a core concept, a core principle. I always have been confused, though, by this idea that I'll be strategic when I have more time. Like that's always completely confused me, right? Like we don't have enough time not to be strategic with how we use resources and how we try to impact the business and those kinds of things. So I think there is a balance to it, but I think fundamentally the principle about ops is we need to remain excellent and operationally excellent in that category. But on the flip side of it, we need to continuously think from a strategy lens of how are we investing our scarce capital to move the needle to create those outcomes from a business strategy perspective. Like that's, to me, it's not really a tension. The two can't exist without each other, actually. So maybe it's just me, I've never actually got that friction, to be honest.
So
I think you raise a really great point there, Matt, and they have to coexist, and the clock will actually run out on us if we're not thinking strategically. And that's why I think that discipline piece that I talked about is so important. You have to make that a priority.
yeah, and Tim, I want to hear about this, but I want to plant a question in the minds of Matt and Bess. Organizationally, are there ways to structure to do this well? So I want to come back to that. But Tim, from your conversations and your dealings with the many folks in the CIO Executive Council, how do you see them wrestling with this?
Yeah, I think there is somewhat of a tension. It's diminishing now as we move forward, but especially during last year and going into early this year. I mean, what IT leader in his or her right mind is going to say they're not strategic minded? I mean, that's a question you can say, of course I am. But when push comes to shove, it's the functional stuff that has to get done, for disaster resiliency, so to speak, and going forward. I think that what's going to happen is going to be more reliance. The CEO is going to get more involved in the business side. There's going to be more reliance on those team members, those people, the functional, keeping the lights on people in IT, pushing things forward. I think it's going to change the role of the CIO and change their responsibilities going forward.
Yeah. Now, Bess, we know that a lot of organizations are still structured very traditionally, as they've been for a long time. But do you think there are things or things that you've done in your organization that kind of ease this tension or make sure that operationally things are going smoothly so that you can focus your time on the strategic?
Yes, we've made a number of changes, actually in recent history, both within technology and across the business to reflect the strategic focus. And so by having that top-down business focus and really efforts around driving growth and focus around product and a everyday digital first customer experience, it's made a huge deal for our teams. And then I think there's like the pieces around just how you get the work done on a day in and day out basis, leveraging agile principles with cross-functional teams, concepts like an implementation of DevOps. As we think about our architectures of the future, even those, if you're making those future forward decisions and your investments and your approach to getting the work done, it positions you so that you can be more strategic in your thinking. As you think about, your PI planning and your horizons and those kinds of things, it just helps you really see beyond the day in and day out. But to Matt's point, it is still table stakes to keep the lights on and the doors open, and that's what creates the space that you need to think strategically.
Yeah, Matt, any learnings from your structure, things you're doing differently that you think work?
And I think what I'd probably add is, like I said earlier, we don't really have a traditional IT organization, if you will. Yes, we do those things like the infrastructure, networking, laptop, desktop, cyber, etc. But we specifically kind of rebranded our group Digital and Enterprise Capabilities, and we've changed a lot of the structure around to reflect the more forward-leaning approach in digital experience, data analytics, innovation, etc. I think the other aspect that we've added to the mix is we've created a company-wide transformation office to coordinate the totality of the strategic transformations that we're trying to implement in the company, and that is actually part of my organization. So that concept is a little bit probably unique to us to some degree in that it coordinates that across the totality of the enterprise.
Makes sense. So I guess I would ask both of you, Bess and Matt, what would you want to be focusing more on 3 years from now? Let's answer that question that we asked our survey respondents. Bess?
I think for us, we're continuing to focus on the workforce from a skills standpoint and building strong teams that deliver and helping to retain and grow them. So certainly the talent and skill set piece is a big focus. From a technology perspective, it's getting scale out of areas where we've made the right and future forward investments and driving those to scale. And I've already mentioned the focus around customer experience, everyday digital first experiences, and then our, enabling product and our partnerships.
Great. Matt, what about for you? 3 years from now, you want to be doing more? You want to be at Lake Geneva.
I might not. Yeah, Lake Geneva sounds nice. I think for us, we're a high growth firm, right? And I think over the next 3 years, really, it's all about taking the base structures, platforms, and things we've implemented and bringing them to scale and large strategic impact. I mean, that's where we're at, right? And over the next 3 years, that's the growth curve that we're essentially on. So it's not so much about focusing on different content, it's more focusing on the scale aspect of it.
That's great. And our time is going by very rapidly, so I want to touch it.
Well, let me just interject there for a second. So getting back to Bess's comment about having a product-minded IT focus and relying on IT talent, we do have a question from the audience. Is how has the talent/skill composition of your teams evolved, and what are you doing internally to adapt that? And I guess it reflects on the whole culture of the IT organization as well.
Yeah. And we're definitely going to be talking about that. But if you guys want to pop out a quick answer to Tim's question here, Matt, your thoughts on that?
We've reshaped a lot of our organization over the last year, and I think the types of skill sets that we've brought in, we've kind of mentioned already, a lot of the digital experience, digital innovation, data analytics, but also folks that could really partner with our lines of business, understand the strategies, and bring impact there. So it's really the business focused aspect, as well as the more digital skills that we've been focusing on, as well as the cyber security piece.
The same for us, really.
Yeah.
It's a big focus, and leveraging internal talent. We recently brought tech and ops together as one organization, and so that creates a whole new synergy of opportunities to help talent elevate and grow their careers in new and different ways that maybe they hadn't considered in the past. So it's also that's the one thing I would add to what Matt shared.
Great. Well, I'm actually skipping ahead in our survey, and I want to touch on this because, Tim, you brought it up, and it's a good lead in. So one of the areas that we ask about is remote work and the whole hybrid work environment going forward and how people are dealing with this. And I want to talk with our colleagues about that. So here we can see, cybersecurity and collaboration tools are at the top of priority list for remote work when we ask, what are your top tech priorities focused specifically on the hybrid work environment? Number one, once again, improve cybersecurity. We saw concern about that really ratchet up with the whole move to remote and hybrid work. Ensure we have the right collaboration platform for our organization. Improve network reliability and performance. Reconsider tools for training. So what we're seeing is in our conversations is sort of a great reassessment right now. We pivoted really quickly to remote and hybrid work. Now we're taking a step back to really look at, did that work well? What do we need to do to make it work better? I'd love to know from all of you, Matt, let's start with you. What do you need in order for your organization to do remote work as well as possible and hybrid work? What are the things that are missing?
Yeah, and I think we were talking about this the other day. Oddly, a lot of it comes down to how do you make, for lack of a better term, hybrid meetings work well, right? So when you have some folks that are remote, some folks might be in a facility together, how do you create an equitable experience such that you're bringing all the right thinking to the table to make the right decisions? And that might sound like a small thing, but oddly, we're finding that is the core aspect to get right. And so we're doing a lot of work with artificial intelligence-based video and things to try to even out those experiences and create a holistic kind of collaboration space for our organization. We also have a collaboration model called Sage Flex, which really brings a lot of flexibility into where people are located in the first place. And that has a lot of benefits for us from a talent recruitment point of view, et cetera. But the main thing from a technical lens that we're focused on is this idea of how do we create these equitable, high collaboration, high impact experiences and spaces.
Yeah, that makes sense. Bess, what about for you?
Yes, we have a similar flexibility approach in that we very early in the pandemic moved towards a more flexible model long term for our employee base, and we made a lot of sort of core business decisions in terms of our hub or site strategy that supports that. So for us, the flexibility plus sustaining our business culture is very important. And for that reason, the hybrid meeting model, now that we've started to have folks come back to the office to the extent that they desire in our flexible model, is certainly challenging, I would say, the solutions that are out there today. So we keep our ear to the ground and do a lot of experimentation ourselves to make sure that we are able to harness the capabilities as they start to rise and meet our expectations. I think we've done well enough, as most companies have in the last couple of years, but we're not where things need to be to support the long-term flexible hybrid working model yet.
Yeah, and the other day I talked to 3 very senior technology executives in advance of a panel for IDG's Future of Work conference, which is coming up. And all three of them brought up this idea of we have to do meetings better, right, in this hybrid environment, because we have people remote who don't feel like equal participants in those meetings. We don't have the etiquette of the meetings down. We don't have the technology of the meetings down. So I was interested to hear you both bring that up. It seems like, better meeting solutions or better meeting approaches are absolutely critical.
Yeah, the equity concept and the one in a box is one of the halo effects, I would say, of remote working. The other piece is human behavior. We can all now go off video or hit mute when things go awry or you're dragging papers around or trying to get your lunch in between meetings. And in a hybrid world, you can't have people using those same behaviors. If you've got several people, in a meeting room on site and you've got folks remote, it's very disruptive.
Yeah.
I almost feel like behaviors in some ways have gone back, taken a step backwards where they were a decade or so ago.
Yeah, indeed. Tim, what's your perspective on this from your work with your colleagues?
Yeah, I think there's no playbook. I mean, they're all doing different things and trying different things. Some work, some don't. I think the tools are pretty adequate. They're going to get better. Matt mentioned AI. If you talk to Facebook/Meta, we'll all be in the metaverse someday.
No.
Looking at each other and being whatever. I think it comes down to that flexibility question. IDC predicted that by, within 5 years, 76% of people would be working remotely. We're at that point today when we're making decisions because of that. And flexibility, I think, comes down to, it's not making presentations or tools better. It's learning how to manage, motivate, and measure the productivity of people in this new world we're in, this new hybrid work environment. In the early stage of 2020, it was easy. It was a trust factor. Do you feel productive today? Yeah, sure. I'm 110%. Great. Check off that box. Going forward, it's not going to be like that. You have to have some distinct measurements.
And in this metaverse that you bring up, I will definitely be slimmer, younger, and funnier. My avatar will be all of those things. But I want to ask, and I'll start with you, Matt, what have you found as you're managing a team that's probably hybrid and remote these days? And Bess, I assume that's true for you. What's been your biggest challenge as a manager leading a technology organization?
I think, and we mentioned it earlier, is just sustaining the culture of the organization, right? And the biotech industry is such that it thrives on, human interaction, deep personal interaction, those kinds of things. And there was a lot of stuff we were doing within the office facility to keep up the culture of the company, et cetera. And translating that into a virtual remote work environment, I think that's where we've experienced the challenge, and we're trying to invent new ways to do that. But that's been the key piece for us.
Yeah, it's that culture piece. Yeah. What about for you, Bess?
I think it's just really being purposeful about taking care of people. Caring for us is one of our 5 values, and so creating the circles of connection that you can't get naturally by linking up in the cafeteria or in the sort of the drive-by on the way back and forth to get a cup of coffee or gathering type scenarios. So I think just being really purposeful and help creating a lot of small circles so people can still feel that human connection. And I do think the hybrid model is really important for the future as well, because we have some folks who won't thrive from home.
Yeah.
And so creating that flexible approach gives them the option to do what helps them thrive. And knowing your people and their teams and what helps them thrive and being flexible to meet them where they're at, I think is really important.
Yeah, I heard an expert on this interviewed the other night, and he said it's a difficult balancing act because it's really a requirement for many employees that you're trying to hire today. They want that flexibility. But at the same time, their number one complaint is, I'm not going to get the same recognition, the same opportunities for advancement, the same collegiality by working remotely. So it's hard to give them both, but that's, I guess, what we're working on. So I do want to cover a couple of areas. We got, I think, a little bit less than 10 minutes left. We have some slides on where people are anticipating new hires and what skills they're looking for. So again, cybersecurity is winning by several lengths in many of these questions. You can see that's where the number one area for anticipating new hires, data science and analytics, which I would group with the next bucket of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and then application development. Cloud architecture is also at the top. So these are reflecting big shifts that we've talked about earlier. These are the positions that are most difficult to fill. And they very similar to the previous slide. Cybersecurity, viewed as the most difficult to fill. Data science, analytics, machine learning, AI, very challenging to find those analytics related skills. And then anything around cloud and the cloud integration, cloud architecture, those things. So those are areas that people pointed out. I would love to hear from Bess and from Matt. Right now, where it's so difficult to hire, we're in the midst of this big, what do they call it, the big quit or the great resignation. What are your strategies for hiring and equally retaining and reskilling people in this crazy environment? Bess, what's working for you?
I think one of the big things that are working for us is really the leverage of our culture. And that's why it's so important that we're working to sustain that in the flexible model. We absolutely exactly reflect, I would say, the top 6 categories here. So we're not unique in that regard, but the work in terms of really trying to have diverse slates in the process is helping us. And I'm sure we'll hit diversity and inclusion here shortly. But that's helping us to widen things. And as I mentioned, specifically in the tech space, we are working on, in the combination of tech and ops, the opportunity to hopefully elevate folks that have desires to evolve their careers in the technology space from our core operations and typical sort of customer-facing servicing aspects. They're on the front lines with our customers every day. And a lot of times that grit, creativity, and perspective that they bring to new skill sets and new opportunities in the technology world can bring magic. And so we're very excited about that future as well.
Yeah, that's great. Matt, how are you wrestling with this, both the hiring, retaining, reskilling?
Yeah, I mean, I think for Sage, our focus is delivering innovations in brain health that can really change the paradigm of how brain health disorders are treated, right? And I think one of the things that we focus on and the people that are attracted to the company have a similar passion in that space for making a big impact in society. And I think that's something that is helpful to a degree, but it's also just aligning the mission of what we're doing with the mission of folks that are attracted to us. I would say on the flexible work, the remote work, that's been a benefit for me as I've built a new leadership team this year, in that, the talent pool that's out there, we're not really that restricted by geography at this point. So we've been able to recruit folks from, essentially all over the United States. So that's been really helpful. But I think, focusing on that core objective of the company and making sure that we're aligning that with the folks that are coming on board. That's been the key thing.
Yeah. So you're leading with mission, and you're finding that it's actually easier in this environment to get the skills that you're looking for.
And I think for us, because to some degree, because of the flexible working, the remote working has opened up doors geographically that would not necessarily have been open before. So.
Yeah, great. Tim.
And we have a question related to that just came in. So we all know that positions are difficult to fill right now. How long do you think that tail is going forward, especially, with cybersecurity?
Great question.
Maybe a next generation of people coming up, the Gen Zs maybe, will be more adept at cybersecurity tactics as they evolve, continue to evolve. Do you think it's going to dramatically reduce labor requirements? How long are we going to have to go through this IT talent shortage, do you think?
Great question. Bess, you want to tackle that?
Yeah, I don't have a crystal ball on that. I don't see an end in sight in the near term in any of those areas. If I were going to pick one that might tail off a little bit sooner rather than later, you might see some trickle down in the pipeline or length of the pipeline for areas like cloud. I think that that will become more and more commoditized over time as you start seeing more scale. But I still think the competition is going to be high there for the foreseeable future.
Matt, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there will be a lot of competitiveness as we sort of move forward. Will that change? Will that shift? Will some skills become a higher priority than others? Well, naturally, that's always sort of been the case. And I think, this speaks to are we investing enough in the talent pipelines of the future, right? In our internship programs, our apprenticeship programs, all these kinds of things. That's always been a passion of mine, to ensure that as we look back, we're building out, the right pipelines to give us the talent of the future and open up opportunities for folks that want to make a big impact, So I think that this just stresses that.
Yeah. And I'd love to hear, Go ahead,
I'll
Tim.
add to that. We had a question earlier that related to that. And, some of the things that, if you look at Gen Z, what they're looking for is they want more collaboration. They know how to use the tools. They want to feel involved in projects and they want to be challenged by projects. It's not a money game totally. I mean, money's important, but that's not number one. These young people want challenging projects. So the question comes from a public government sector. Do you think this is going to help sectors like that attract new people to compete against the Amazons and the Facebooks?
Yeah, great question.
I mean, I think a little bit of that, Tim, if I'm understanding the question correctly, goes back to what I said before. I think certainly in the healthcare space and the biotech space, we're trying to develop products that can, in some senses, deliver real impacts into massive diseases for society, right? As an industry, that's what we're trying to do. And I think that mission is attractive to folks who want to participate in that, And I think if there is a generational dynamic where that becomes more critical versus other aspects of career growth, then yeah, I think that is a tailwind that can improve that, for our industry to a certain degree.
Yeah. And our time is getting tight, so what I want to do is make sure we touch on this topic or not just touch on it, but engage on this topic of diversity and inclusion. I know that's a focus for both of your organizations. So I'm sure that this hybrid work environment or the difficulty in hiring today is making this more challenging. Love to hear, how your strategies are evolving in this environment that we're in. Bess, why don't we start with you?
Sure. We've had a relationship. So look, diversity and inclusion is just a part of our DNA. It's a huge focus of our company. It was led from our CEO as we became our own publicly traded company back in 2014. And so we've continued to make investments in the D&I space in general, multiple years of investment of Girls Who Code. So I'm now the executive sponsor, and we're starting to see girls come all the way through the program into college and now being eligible for internships, those kinds of things. Partnerships with 110 Coalition as well to really help elevate opportunities and remove artificial barriers in the hiring process, to just asking managers on a day in and day out basis to make sure they have a diverse slate. We hire the best candidate, but please work to have a diverse slate. That way we know we're casting a wide net. And with a culture of inclusion and the leverage of our diversity networks, we have 8 networks. I think if you just make that part of your DNA and how you operate, and frankly, you measure successes with data and work to get better every day. That's really our focus.
Matt?
Yeah, I mean, similarly, this space is a core value for Sage, and this area is something I've been involved in the tech sector for quite a long time. And I think there are a lot of different solutions and avenues and pathways that I've experimented with the companies of the various areas that have focused on this. And I think, there's not one solution, but I think actually some of the early talent development programs, pipelining programs, internships, apprenticeships, some of those can provide pathways to provide opportunities that might not have been there in the first place. And that's something that we're doing at the current company that I'm in right now.
That's great. Well, we've only got about a minute left, and I'd love to hear from each of you on this question. And Tim, because I used to work for you, I'm going to put you on the spot first. As we go through, we're heading into 2022, we're into it by a couple of weeks now, a few weeks. What do you think CIOs, one sentence each, what do you think CIOs should be most focused on in 2022?
It's got to be the culture of the organization. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, people look for leaders who are accountable, can communicate, they're honest, and they're empathetic. And that last one is so important. And a lot of our members tried to do that by one of them, from a major retailer by making calls every Sunday night to 5 people in his organization of 140 IT people. That's not the answer. So culture is important.
Culture and empathy. Bess, one sentence from you. What should you be focused on 2022?
Take care of people, be aligned with business outcomes, and just lean in and collaborate across the business to make sure you're aligned on what those outcomes should be.
Great. And Matt, what's your advice?
For me, it's focus on the mission of the company, make sure that aligns with the vision that our employees have for their careers, and attempt to make a difference every single day.
That's great. Matt, Bess, Tim, thank you from me. But Tim, I want to turn this over to you for a final word from the CEC.
No, I'd like just to thank our, Bess and Matt for doing this. We've had CEC members participate in this. It's a great thing. This is a quantitative view of what's happening, and it's a great guide for CIOs out there and IT leaders. But it's a lot more. You got to go beyond the numbers. It's not all about the numbers.
That's great. Well, thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Again, we'll make the full research report available to anyone who wants it. But thank you for joining us. Thanks again to my guests.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, everyone.